backup. Who's got it?
You need to boot from installation disk?
Yeah, boot from the disk. There's nothing in the menus. You have to boot from the disk. The point is, you're using image backup, you're going to wipe out the whole operating system, you can't be running. And you're probably doing this because it won't even boot up anyway, so you just boot from the disk. If you use a system restore, what happens to your documents?
Nothing.
They're preserved. That's why it's great. You don't lose your emails, you don't lose your documents, it just fixes the system. That's why it's my favorite repair tool. It usually just makes it work without you having to have a backup or anything. What does shadow copy?
Great. Copy while the system is running. Or...
Yeah, it copies a file even if it's in use, and it's used to make restore points. This is a new technology. Well, I mean, I think new in Vista, which is really nice. Remember back in years ago when I used to go on MS-DOS and Windows 95 based networks, if a file was in use, it wouldn't get backed up because it couldn't be read while it was locked. And so if some clown would leave their machine on, it would lock the main database and it wouldn't be in the backup tapes. You had to go through the room, make sure all the machines were off before leaving them.
It's used for restore points or previous versions?
Both of them, yeah. They both use the same thing. Previous versions are also based on the shadow copies. Yeah. Right. And what's stateful packet expansion? Who's got it?
No, it is. That's a good yes.
It's,
inspect incoming package.
No, that's stateless packet
It's
expansion.
Okay.
filtering based on activity or something like that?
That's true. Anybody got a more detailed one?
Takes into consideration like the previous state and any decisions you made before. or
Yes.
any decisions it made before, so that it's more informed.
It does, although to be more specific, it doesn't take anything done. What it does is it has a state table, and it knows if connections are established, waiting to time out, or about 4 conditions. That's all it has in addition to knowledge of the current packet. It can look at the state of the connection. So in particular, remember if you've done a handshake before and you have a data transfer in progress, it doesn't know everything about every previous packet, but it has a state table in addition to the information of the current packet. And that makes it very powerful. That's why Windows, it protects people very well, because it can make you a client only. So if you ask for anything, it goes right through the firewall. If anything comes in you didn't ask for, it bounces. That does stop most attacks without bothering the user. Right, and so what do those little shield signs mean?
It requires user's approval to run.
That's right. It means you're going to see a user account control box. You'll have to elevate to administrator to do that option.
What UIC user account box?
That's true. And that's the point. It means that it's warning you that those are administrative actions. And you'll probably have to go through UAC prompt to use them. And if you're not an administrative user, you'll have to type in administrative password. Any questions? Oh, it's charging the next stuff. Let me see if I can kill those lights right over the screen because that's it. All right. So, passwords. And more about user accounts. All right. So everything here is the, well, I guess I shouldn't even say that really. There are quite a few differences. You can only do anything having to do with domains in professional or better. Local users and groups, you don't get it in Starter and Home Premium. You have to use the Control Panel Users tool, which is not as thorough. And Starter doesn't get fast user switching, and you don't get parental controls if you join a domain. So these features do vary a bit across the versions. Anyway, so this is discretionary security. If you take Security Plus class, you will learn that there are 4 general types of security models. There's mandatory access control, which is what the military uses, where the people and the objects are sorted into categories like top secret and classified and unclassified. And if you want to move anything from one category to another, you have to go to an authority figure at the top and wait for them to move something declassified from top secret down to secret or something. That's the most strict. And then there's role-based access control, which is what corporate domains use. The people and the computers are sorted into categories like tech support, marketing, management, and the management can do this, but the tech support can do that, and you sort them into groups and do it that way by roles. Then there's rule-based access control, which is what firewalls use, where there are just logical rules. And that's like parental controls are also rule-based access control. You can watch this show, but this show that is NC-17, you can't watch that one. You can use the computer, but you can only use it for 2 hours because that's all your playtime today and stuff like that. There are just these logical rules that specify what you're allowed to do. And the weakest of all security models is the one Windows uses, discretionary access control. This is because the idea is it's a personal computer. You own it. You should be allowed to do anything you want. And so it is at your discretion. Everything, discretionary access control is the only one of these where every object has an owner. Every folder, every file, every printer, everything has an owner, and the owner can do anything they want with it. They can determine who's allowed to use it. So that's the game here. In the early days, this was intrinsic, as opposed to explicit, because you had Windows 95 and FAT. And FAT had no permissions on the disk at all. So physical access to the disk meant you could read and write everything on the disk, just like a floppy. That's how FAT was. But NTFS has permissions on every object. You can say this person can read, this person can't use it at all, this person can read and write, this person can read, write, and execute it, basically, and so on. So this means you have to know who everybody is all the time to determine what they're allowed to do. And the way Microsoft does it is with a security identifier, which is a long number like this. You can see them in the registry, in HKey users. You can get it at the command prompt. With whoami/user, you can see your SID. They all start S15. Then they have a long, essentially random number that's created when your machine is first installed using something like the machine name and the time of day. And then at the end, they have a specifier that determines who you are. The system accounts have low numbers like 500 and 501, like the administrator account. And accounts you created start at 1,000 and go up. And this is exactly the way Unix does it and Linux. It's the same system. But these numbers here, they don't bother with this mess, but they have the same numbers system at the end. That's the ultimate identifier of who you are. And so the access control list on a folder really is a list of security identifiers and permissions. This security identifier can get in here. This is why if you make an account and you make a folder and only this one person is allowed to go in the folder, and then you delete the account and make another account with the same name, you can't get in the folder anymore. Because even though it has the same name, it now has a new SID. And you will not be recognized as equal to the old account for security purposes. Now the new thing since Windows Vista is least privilege. This is something Linux has had for decades. Windows got it for the first time in Vista, finally, which means you're not always running as administrator. Every XP and all earlier versions, you just log in as administrator all the time, and that's why they're always infected with malware, because you're surfing the web, going to Facebook, and you're the administrator, so if some web page tries to install something, it just goes right on. Now, you have two tokens. You actually have two different identifiers on the machine, if you are an administrator account. And this is like a SID, but it's got a few more things in it. And so when you run under normal conditions, you're running with low privileges. So if you're surfing the web and you go to a website, you're running as your standard token, and if a website tries to install something, a user account control box will pop up saying, wait, it's trying to do an administrative access, do you want to allow that? That's the point of it. You are running with low privilege, and so you can only escalate briefly to do one act and then come down. Linux has been this way for a long time. Every time you do something administrative, a box pops up saying, I need your root password to do that, and it only elevates for that one action, and then you're down low again. This is very handy, and that's the point of user account control, and it does make you a lot safer if you leave it turned on, which most people do in Windows 7, or in Windows Vista, most everybody just turned it off because it was implemented so clumsily. So the access control list, if you right-click a folder and go to properties, you'll see, this is actually kind of fun. If you want to see the actual SID here, all you have to do is make a folder, give someone permission to the folder, and then delete that account. See, the SID will stay in the list. This is what all these entries really are, is this long SID. But if you, another thing that's kind of fun is if you put in a domain account and it's a slow network, you can open a property sheet and you'll see this SID for a second, and then it'll flip over to a name, because it has to look up the name. The SID is the primary data stored on the file, and it has to go to the domain controller to find out what the name of that account is. And if the account has been deleted, it puts a question mark here saying, I can't figure out who this guy is, but that's the SID. Anyway, that's what's really going on the file. You have SIDs and then permissions, read and execute, full control, and so on. So there are two types of restrictions. You can have permissions, you can have rights. Permissions are the rights to use one particular object, like to open a folder or execute a file. A right is a system-wide activity, like resetting the clock, lowering the user account control level, putting on updates, things like that. And the owner of a resource assigns permissions, and every resource, like a printer or a disk partition, or has an owner. Administrators of the machine are the ones that set the rights that affect the whole machine using local security policy. And as you'll see, I think you do some of this in the projects. There's a project where you turn off control panels, so it only has a couple items. You can do that kind of thing, and that's a system-wide activity. You can limit your machine that way if you're the administrator. So privileges are a general term that includes both permissions and rights. And so normally you use the built-in account types. Now you can go and modify what the administrator account does. And the difference between an administrator account and a standard user. You can even go make other groups, like Windows 2000 had this thing called power users, because Microsoft really didn't like least privilege. They tried to invent some kind of set of privileges that was halfway between user and administrator, so people could use it instead of being logged on as an administrator all the time and still not get the machine infected with malware. And they called it power users, and that didn't work. There isn't any halfway. You either have enough permission to install junk or you don't. And you can't really never have that permission, and you can't really always have that permission. And they finally had to accept this escalation process where you're hopping up from one to the other, which baffles end users, of course. It's very strange. Baffles people who are really used to XP too. Anyways, so there's now two accounts, standards. There's two groups given by default. Standard accounts are in the users group, administrators in the administrators group. There is a guest group, but it's disabled by default. And for that matter, the built-in administrator account is also disabled by default. But the account you create during installation is in the administrators group. So administrators can do the same things that you would expect from Windows XP. They can create user accounts and delete them, install programs, put on updates, ActiveX controls, set permissions, access all files, including files owned by someone else, including files they're locked out of, because an administrator can take ownership. And then they're the owner and they can assign credit. It can take a couple steps, although Windows 7 will actually automate that. It'll say, you currently don't have rights to permit to get in here, click a button and you can get in. Back in Windows XP, you could do it, but you had to know how to do it. Right-click, go to Properties, go to Advanced Page, take ownership, close the property sheet, open it again. Now you're the owner, give yourself full control, close it again, now you can get in. But it does that all automatically now. So you can put things in the system files and the program files, you can restore backed up things, you can grant rights to other people, you can elevate other people from user to administrator. You know, that's what you expect. Turn on parental controls, mess with the firewall. Those are all the administrative tasks that you don't want normal end users doing, but the administrator has to be able to do that stuff. Standard users can change things about their own account, but nobody else's. They can use programs that are already installed, and now they can put on updates. This is another improvement in the Microsoft system. It used to take administrative rights to put on updates, but that's really a bad idea because you do want your end users to put on updates. So now you can do that without administrative rights. Yeah, you can install approved ActiveX controls. The administrator can set the policy, and you can have something like signed ActiveX controls are permitted, and then you can put them on without administrative rights. They can also put in drivers now, which we'll talk about. You can put in approved drivers, and they can restore their own files. They can view the system clock, and they can change the time zone, but they can't change the clock otherwise, which is pretty good. That way they can travel on an airplane. Anyway, time is actually pretty important. If you take any server certification classes after this, they'll give you, Microsoft always goes on and on about the time. All the time has to be accurate or your network won't work. And I must say, in practice, that does not appear to be true. If you let your machines have random off times, it doesn't seem to stop at the meal log into the domain controller, but what it does is it messes up forensics. If you have an incident and you try to analyze the logs, you'll really be sorry if the times are all wrong. It'll be miserable. Take the logs from one machine and compare it to the logs of another. So that's why security people often go on about making sure the time is right. All right, so this is the point. You can add a driver to the driver store. The driver store is the built-in drivers that came when you installed Windows, and it had an update to put more drivers in there. Those are all the plug-and-play devices, where you just plug it in, and it already has the driver, doesn't really have to install it, and you don't need administrative permissions or anything. As soon as it detects that driver device, it will just put in the driver. And the administrator can add other devices to that store. So if you have like some special keyboard or something you use at your company, and it's got an unapproved driver, you can add it to the store, and then people will not need administrative rights to put it in. And you can even sign your own stuff too. It's kind of lengthy. I used to have it in my Vista class. It's in my old notes. You have to download like a 1 or 2 gigabyte Windows development kit, and then you can sign your own drivers, which is one way to get past the driver signature enforcement in 64-bit versions of Windows. Anyway, so guests have the same privileges as standard users, but they cannot create a password. The whole point of guests is as many people sharing one account. You don't want one guest blocking the other guests out. But it's disabled by default, and people don't use it much, except for things like kiosks. You know, Windows has some kiosk wizards for something like a store. You have a store and there's like our catalog here. And they don't want you going off surfing the web and reading email. They just want you going through this one web page. And they try to lock you out. Those things are kind of fun to hack through. They're always paper thin. You can trivially get through them. And those things, if you go to like a store and they say, please apply to work at this store and fill out a form, those things are trivial to hack through. You read about this in 2600 all the time. Just click a couple buttons, like type help, then suddenly you get a help page, you get to the command prompt, you're talking about all everybody else's applications. You know. That kind of stuff where you take a full Windows machine and you try to lock it down, it tends to fail spectacularly. So the administrator account is disabled. If you do enable it and log in as administrator, then you'll never see any UAC account. You really will be always administrator all the time, the way you were in Windows XP. So if you really want that, this is an easy way to get it. Turn the administrator account back on and use that. Here's the other groups. If you go right-click computer and go to Manage, Local Users and Groups, this has been around since Windows 2000. Hasn't changed a bit. Users are here, groups are here. There's by now a lot of groups here. Almost none of these you ever use. I must say one that really helped me in this room. About 3 years ago, I taught classes in this room, and in other classes, not the one I was teaching, some client came in here and started downloading Harry Potter movies on BitTorrent. And we got DMCA takedown notices, and they said, what are you going to do about it? So the problem is, we were teaching Cisco in here, and people needed to be able to get to the IP addresses and change them. And so they were administrator. And I said, I checked, and this was the cure, was to use this group, Network Configuration Operators. This is a good group. Network Configuration Operators can change the IP settings, but they can't install software. That was the right answer. That's what these machines are logged in as in here. So that one I found to be useful. The rest of these are pretty obscure, and you don't use them much. But there are many groups. The main groups, of course, you ever use are just users and administrators. The administrative accounts are here, the standard accounts are here, and if you go to the normal users and control panel, that's all you see. All the rest of these exotic groups are rarely used. You can create your own groups too if you want to. But normally, there's no point because this is all local to one machine. If you have a lot of groups, just make a domain on the domain controller. That's where you ought to have groups. All right, so if you want, this one always gets students, if you belong to more than one group, you get all the permissions of every group. So if you are an administrator and users have read, but administrators have full control, if you're both a user and an administrator, you get full control. The only exception to that is deny. So we'll talk, all right, the local accounts I just mentioned, local accounts are on your C drive and they only affect that one machine. So if I make 4 accounts, 4 different people can log into that one machine. This, as you can imagine, doesn't work very well at a company, and Microsoft's recommendation is by the time you have 10 computers, you should not do it this way. You should just get a domain controller because you need to have a central point of administration. Because if you have 10 computers, and then you hire a new employee, you have to go make the account on each one of those 10 computers. If you fire somebody, you have to go delete the account off those 10 computers. If you want to update the next version of something, you have to carry around a disk, all those 10 machines. And in reality, after a few months, you've got a mess. There are accounts that shouldn't be there anymore. There are passwords that aren't the same. There's versions of stuff that aren't the same. This is why you make a central point of administration. As your domain controller, you have to pay for another machine, buy Windows Server, and then you define all that stuff right here in one place. You see, we are going to the next version of Word. I'm putting it here, and next time everyone logs in, they're all going to that version of Word. No nonsense. This patch is going out. Everybody's getting this patch next time they log in. I'm deleting this account because we fired this guy. That means I know he can't log into any of the machines. It's so much better. And that's why everybody does it. All right, so if you go into Control Panel, you'll see user accounts here, and this lets you do the very simple things, make a new account, elevate somebody from standard to administrator, change the picture, change the password. That's what you go for ordinary activities. There are stored network passwords on the machine. This is a weak spot in the security of Microsoft. There's an LSA storage that stores your passwords to other systems. They're trying to create single sign-on. So if you go to work and sign in once, and you connect to the server, you don't have to sign in again. But that means there are other passwords to other services stored in your account, and there are often problems with these things not being stored well enough and stolen. You can make a password reset disk here. This is a floppy that will not have your password on it. It'll have some kind of code which stands for your password. And so if you make that and put it in the safe, then if you forget your password, you can log in with a password reset disk. That's handy. You can connect how your online IDs are connected to a Windows Live account, which is, Microsoft has tried this 3 or 4 times to become the standard login for everything, the passport and such, where they would like your online accounts to be logged into your Windows account. This never got very popular. And your file encryption certificates, if you right-click on a file, go to Properties, and encrypt it, then the first time you do that, your machine will make a cryptographic certificate, which has a key in it, and that's tied to your password. And if you don't back it up, and your account gets corrupted, and your operating system gets corrupted and restored, you'll lose that. You'll not be able to get into those encrypted files anymore. So Microsoft will always remind you to back up your file encryption certificate. EFS is rarely used. It does not solve very many business cases. For example, you can't use EFS to encrypt something and then email it. It will just be like in clear text of the email. The only thing it does is protect you from other people logging into that one machine than you, and that's not a very common problem in business cases. Most domain administrators I know just disable the EFS and group policy and say, don't use that. Use something else. Then you've got, so here you can change advanced properties down here. You can change from a local account to a roaming account. A roaming account on a domain means all your account settings are on the domain controller. And therefore, if I log out to one machine and drive to another branch office and log in there, I will get my desktop, my documents, my programs, everything will just travel in. Everything's really on the server. It makes a local copy on your machine for performance reasons and then runs from there. So this does end up wasting your hard drive and leaving extra copies of that stuff all over the place. But in practice, it's very handy. It of course means something you should be aware of, which is that Active Directory in general and roaming profiles consume a lot of power, a lot of network traffic, and a lot of processing when you log in. Companies very often experience this. I've seen this too. You come to work in the morning, even a small company with like 30 people, if they all try to log on at 9 in the morning, the network freezes and slows down and it waits, and people have trouble logging on. They get no DHCP service. It is ridiculous how much network traffic is created by Active Directory logins. And Microsoft keeps on saying you've got to have 2 domain controllers, you've got to have an extra domain controller at each location. You need a lot of domain controllers throughout your enterprise to really give enough performance. Otherwise, people get frustrated. I remember at 5, when you try to go home, it took forever to log off. It was really annoying. Everything slowed down. Anyway, you've got environment variables if you want to mess with them. We talked about percent system root and such here. And there's fingerprint data here. If you have a fingerprint reader, it's integrated in Windows 7 to handle your fingerprint data. Fingerprints are not stored by any computer system I'm aware of, not like a photograph, like the cops can identify you from it. What they do is you put your fingerprint on the reader like the thing next to the iPhone, I'm sure, and they measure like 10 numbers from it, which don't really represent your complete fingerprint at all. It's some kind of data from your finger, which is reproducible, and you can manage it here. So you can delete an account. If you go to local users and groups, you right-click and delete it, and Microsoft will warn you that deleting accounts is for chumps. If you don't like the account, just disable the account. Then nobody can log in. If you delete an account, that SID is gone forever, and the files that were encrypted with that SID can never be opened at all. The files that have used NTFS permissions on that SID may be inaccessible, but the administrator can get past that by taking ownership. And even if you do delete it, then the question is, do you want to delete all the files in that account or not? What about the stuff on that desktop and in that My Documents folder and such? If you, the default option here is to keep files, I think, and then all the files will go in your account, on your desktop, so you can go through them. But normally at a company, if you fire somebody, you do not delete the account, you disable the account, you hire somebody else, and then you change the name to the new person's name so they're using the previous account, because then they will see what the previous person that had that job was doing. Anyway.
Can you,
yeah.
I guess it's not the same as an individual account, but we once had a group deleted on a domain.
Yeah.
Can you restore those? Someone told me you could, and I started looking into it, and I never got a chance to.
I've never tried it, but I would think not. You can create a new group with the same name and give it the same permissions, but it won't have the same SID.
Yeah,
I would think you'd have the same issue. That if someone actually deletes a group on a domain, you're going to have to reconstruct those permissions. Maybe an OU. I'm not sure. Might be able to get away with that with an OU. Anyway, so that's the point. Deleting an account means you may have trouble accessing files that account created and was trying to keep secret. And if you're using EFS, those files are gone. You'll never get in there if you delete the account unless you backed up the encryption key someplace. And even then, you still need to know that person's password. So here's user accounts is your simplest tool for normal things like creating users and doing normal things. There's an advanced users account page, which is really quite difficult to reach through the GUI, but you can get it with NetPLWiz. And here's where you configure automatic logon. This permits you to do something very unwise, which used to be true of this room, and I think I fixed it. You can make your machine automatically log on. Now, the right way to do this is very simple. If you have only one administrator account and it has no password, it will automatically log on. So if you have something like a public kiosk machine in a computer lab or something, that's how you do it. Nobody will see the login screen at all. They just turn it on and they get a desktop with a start button. But if you want to, you can have multiple accounts and you can go here and set it to automatically log on by clearing this box. Users must enter a username and password. And you can even make it automatically log on to an account that has a password. And that's the way this room was set up at first. There was a CNIT account with a password CNIT and it automatically logged on. And that was bad because students would come in, turn on the machine, start doing their homework, walk out to the bathroom, the machine would lock. 10 minutes of inactivity. When it came back, they need the password to unlock it and they don't know it. And so that's weird. And if you do that, there's another thing. Suppose you have some other account you want to get there. You have to log off and then log in again to get a chance to see the login screen. Anyway, it's kind of screwy, but you might want that feature. But normally, there's no reason to come here and do it that way. You basically, if you come here and you think you need to do this here, you haven't thought this through. Just make one account with no password, and you'll accomplish what you normally want for a public kiosk machine. Anyway, there's local users and groups in computer management. You only get this in Pro and up. This is the old-fashioned way to control them. You can also do all this stuff with the command line, which is how I used to do them. Just make a batch script. Net user will create users, net local group will create local groups. It's very nice. You can just specify their password right on there. So at one time when I first started teaching ethical hacking, we actually had accounts for every student on every machine with their W number because we were very afraid that the students would do something bad. We'd have to have clear trails to catch which student did the bad thing. Now we don't bother with that anymore because none of our hacking students have been doing bad things, but I was able to do it that way. That's a very cheap, poor imitation of a domain controller, is to make scripts to create the same accounts on all the machines. And of course it was kind of a drag that the late students would add, and I'd have only accounts on some of the machines for them and all that. You can change your own password, you can change your picture. The administrator can change the password for someone else's account. This is usually the simplest kind of password recovery. If you forget your password, get the administrator to change your password, and that'll be fine for NTFS permissions, but if you've been encrypting things with EFS, it won't work, because the EFS encryption requires the certificate and your password. And the only way you're going to get those EFS volumes is if you remember your old password and change it back, or if you previously configured a recovery agent, which is a second account that has the privilege of decrypting files. In Windows 2000, this was an automatic feature of EFS. Every time you encrypted any file, the administrator account was added as a second decryptor. So you could always, the administrator could decrypt all your files, but Microsoft discovered that was unwise just because of the logic of organizational structures. There is only one person at the company that should have the right to do everything, and that's the CEO. He's typically not technical. The administrator is actually much lower, a technical staff, and they can be fired, they can be replaced, and you don't want them to have the right to read and access every file. That really doesn't make any sense. Like, you could well be having documents full of your planning meetings, how we're going to outsource your IT to a planning administrator, and we're tired of him being a jerk, and you don't want him reading those files. You really shouldn't have the right to go everywhere. So now there's a separate account. You can create a separate account to be the recovery agent. And that, what Microsoft recommends is that no one should ever log in with that account. That account should have like their credentials in the safe, and you just use it if necessary to recover an encrypted file. That's the main problem with encryption, why most people don't use it. But when you first start using encryption, the first thing you're going to find is you lock yourself out of your own files by forgetting the password or the certificate or something. It's quite risky from a business point of view. You have to develop a culture of understanding your encryption and knowing how to decrypt it, or you will rapidly just mess everything up. Like the Guardian reporter with that top secret documents that Snowden leaked. That's why the British wiped out his computer and seized the guy and held him at the border, because he was carrying these top secret things improperly encrypted. He's carrying them encrypted and he's carrying the password with him. That's what he said. They deny it. But that's well, I was surprised at first, because it's not easy to manage encryption. You have to somehow transport the key through a second channel. You can't carry it on a piece of paper with the computer, obviously. And you have to not lose it, and it has to be long. Julian Assange actually did it right. When he first made his first bundle of encrypted stuff, the password was the entire political history of the world from 1972 to the current age, and then you have to like delete the third word. That was his password. And that was the password for the encrypted torrent that he spread to the world. Because Julian Assange was afraid, when he first started leaking all the military secrets, that the US would just kill it. So he made a dead man switch. He took a file containing all the cables the US hadn't released, and he spread it on BitTorrent, so everybody had it all over the place. It could never be erased, but it was encrypted. It was encrypted with AES, so it was essentially unbreakable, and the key was a long phrase that only he knew. And then he gave that file to 3 newspapers, and he gave them the key. And one of them wrote down the key and published it in a book. Exactly. So then everybody could open that thing. That's how the cables went out. He totally lost control of his encrypted stuff. But his original procedure was pretty good. He had a long sentence that you really couldn't guess. But this is generally the problem with shared secret encryption. Then you tell some people that any one of them can leak it. And somebody just leaked it. That was so. Actually, I think right now he's sailing without a net. I think right now he's no longer has a time bomb to go if someone were to kill him or arrest him. Snowden does, though. Snowden did the same thing. Snowden put out a similar poison pill, or something terrible will be released if he gets killed. Anyway, they blackmail the world this way. It's an interesting technique. So if you forget your password, Microsoft will offer you a password hint. When you first create your account, you could type in a hint and that might help you. You could have made a reset disk. Microsoft will not prompt you to make one, but if you did, that would be an option. Other than that, you can get the administrator to reset it. But in practice, none of these are usually very available for home users, so you use non-Microsoft options. There's a bunch of hacking tools that will let you do it. You can do it with Microsoft options too. I remember the very first time I learned to do this was when I was a Windows 2000 Server teacher, and I found out that you could reinstall Windows 2000 Server from the CD on top of the existing installation, and while it was installing for 10 minutes, you could press, I think, Alt F10 and get a command prompt, and you could use the command prompt to change your password. I thought that was awesome. It takes about 45 minutes. You don't have to reinstall the whole thing and then put on all the patches again, but you can get back into a server after you forgot your password. And then I learned how to hack, and it's trivial. There's so many hacking tools out there, just like within a few minutes. It's a routine repair task. I lost my password. So, all right. So normally you see these icons if you're in a work group with the names. If you're in a domain, you will see this. For some reason, I don't know why Microsoft shipped the product this way. There's an empty frame with no picture in there. Like, why? There's no way to put the picture in there. Like, anyway, that's the way it is. You used to see 3 bars in XP, name, password, domain. Now you see 2, and some confusing message down here. And if you want to specify the domain, you have to put in domain /name, so it can get kind of frustrating. I think you'll do that a little later in this class. You make a domain controller, log into a domain, and see the difference. Like I mentioned before, you can make the thing automatically log in with no password at all if you have only one administrator account and it has no password. So log off ends all processes that are owned by you. So everything you were doing stops. Switch users preserves all your processes and everything on your desktop and lets another user use it. This is so you can be busy and someone wants to come and use it and check your email or something. Lock your computer. Your processes continue to run and the keyboard is locked and the screen goes black so nobody can see it. This is, I know companies where they're very strict about this. If you leave your desk, you must lock your screen because you do not want someone walking by, and they will actually fire you if they go by your account. Your machine is sitting there logged in and not locked, or punish you in other ways. Another thing I've heard a lot of people say they do is if they find a machine unlocked, they'll go in there and change the password. But otherwise, some serious note is made of this. It's a serious breach of security to leave an active machine logged in. This is how a lot of people get hacked into in public places like libraries and these labs. Some student will log in their email and just leave, and somebody can just walk out to the machine and use their email. Another common thing people do, by the way, is they log in their email and then they close the browser without logging off. And all the next person has to do is open the browser and go to like Gmail, and they're in the previous person's account. It happens to be pretty often on teachers' machines. I go to Gmail and I'm logged in as the previous teacher. If you just close the browser, it doesn't cancel your cookie. All right, so that's the log off and lock. And parental controls, of course. It's included in Windows 7. You can set hours of day when children can use the machine and restrict programs and games. In practice, this does not work very well because Microsoft does not pay for a board of censors to censor the internet, so they don't really know all the websites on the internet and whether they're PG or R or X. You pretty much have to go to a pay product like CyberNanny if you actually want to have an efficient list of products. What Microsoft tends to do is use some open source list, and it is so ignorant about, it has too small a list, so what happens is the only thing you use is like PBS Kids or something. There's only a few known sites that are actually known safe, and 99% of the web is unknown and therefore blocked. So it's not a very productive way to censor the internet if you want to keep your kids from seeing porn. Anyway, but it's free. I got a few icebreaker questions. Come grab one if you need one. Of course, those big products actually do have a board of censors serving the internet, sorting all the web into PG and R and X, violence and drugs and all that sort of thing, which is a lot of money they have to spend to do that. And they have to keep on doing it until all new websites come up. True. I expected the Board of Utah, the state of Utah to solve this for us because Utah passed a law about 4 years ago that every ISP must offer porn filtering for every household. And so that would mean they'd have to do the censorship process, and we wouldn't be able to deliver ISP service in Utah, but I never heard any more about that. I don't know if that really happened. If it did, then they would be a great place to get that list for other people that want to censor the web. So, which kind of account is disabled by default? administrator account is disabled. The administrator's group is there, and that's where your so-called administrative accounts are, but the account named administrator is disabled by default. It's considered unsafe to use because the security identifier is easily predictable. And it can be spoofed over networks. Microsoft struggled with that problem, and they finally decided to just disable it by default. All right. What type of user account cannot create a password? Put it at 30. Oh, and that is the guest account. You don't want one guest blocking out other guests. So what kind of account can you only make on a server, not on Windows 7? All right, and those are domain accounts, good. They're on own domain controller, they're not on the Windows 7 box. You can sometimes make them from a Windows 7 box when you run the Active Directory users and computers, but that's actually just a remote control agent controlling the accounts on the server. All right, so what command will list the local user accounts? Put it in 30. All right, and that's net user. Net use is to connect to a share. So if I open a command prompt and do net user, I see the local accounts. There they are. Just the names. Anyway, all right, so we ought to take a break. It's just 10. Let's pick up at 10 after 10.